Good evening. My name is Allison Bovard, and it is my honor this year to serve as the president of the Women of St. Michael. And on the behalf of the women, I'd like to welcome you to St. Michael and All Angels tonight. The Women of St. Michael offer programming like tonight and outreach opportunities for our women in the community. And in addition, our community outreach focuses on the proceeds from the Women of the St. Michael's Women's Exchange gift shop in Highland Park Village, all the profits of which go back to the community in support of nonprofits that work with people working with the most vulnerable in the community, specifically focusing on food, clothing, and shelter and crisis needs. We're delighted to have you join us this evening for what I think will be an animated conversation, looking to what lies ahead for Texas in the years to come and the prospects for how we can be involved in part of this exciting future for Texas. It's my pleasure now to introduce my dear friend Diana Newton as our moderator. I'd like to give you just a brief bio on her, though there's more in the program. Diana is a senior fellow at the John Goodwin Tower Center for Political Studies and a lecturer in public policy and international affairs at SMU, where she teaches in the Tower Center in the Tower Scholar Program. Her extensive resume includes working in the State Department, the White House, with the National Security Council, and with the Council on Foreign Relations. In addition to teaching at SMU, Diana speaks on U.S. relations with Japan, Korea, and China, and she currently serves on the boards of the Deerfield Academy and the International Center for Transitional Justice. Diana's been an active, longtime member of St. Michael, and her most recent leadership role was serving as one of the co-chairs of the Rector Search Committee, which brought us our current rector, Chris Garada, for which we are all very thankful. And in that role, that drew upon her deep reserves of wisdom, patience, leadership, humility, and grace and boundless optimism. Diana and her husband, Jeff, are the proud and devoted parents of four, Hadley, Jack, Thayer, and Will. And it is now with great respect and admiration that I turn this over to Diana. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you so much, Reverend Garada. Thank you for welcoming us to and letting us have this program in our church, our fearless leader, and as the co-chair of the search committee, fabulous rector. And I'd like to thank Allison as well. She, as you may or may not know, was my roommate when we did the pilgrimage on the Camino last fall, and she knows way too much about me, and that could have gone in so many different directions. So I'm grateful for that introduction. I feel a little far away from Tom and Margaret, but exactly, we're bringing Texas together. But it's my honor to have the privilege of moderating this conversation, which really will be a conversation between Tom and Margaret and all of you as we get going. And their bios are in your programs, and I don't feel the need to reiterate their every accomplishment, but I think I can sum them up in one word, which would be wow. I really, just reading their bios and everything that they've done, they both are tremendous public servants who have spent their careers doing important work that has bettered our city, our state, and our nation. We have sitting right here before us the founding partner of a major law firm, the former president of the U.S. Chamber of Commerce Foundation, the former Chief Justice of the Texas Supreme Court pro tem, the former senior advisor to then Governor Bush, former U.S. Assistant Secretary of Education, the former domestic policy advisor to President Bush, a member of the Board of Trustees of the Library of Congress, former U.S. Secretary of Education, the founder of 7 nonprofits, including Texas 2036, and the past president of both the George Bush Presidential Center here in Dallas and the University of North Carolina system. So we really are so lucky to have these great minds both with us tonight, but working on these important issues for our city and our state. One thing that's not in their bios, although you might be able to infer it, is that they have been collaborators for a long time. They've worked together on many things. They've known each other for decades and have worked together on education in Austin with the state legislature, on education in the Capitol in Washington, D.C., with the Department of Education and the U.S. government. And now they're collaborating again on Texas 2036. And I think we're all in for a real treat tonight. So please join me in giving them a warm welcome.
Thank you.
So I know we're here to hear about Texas 2036, but I wanted to actually start by letting them talk a little bit about, or asking them to talk about themselves. And I really wanted to start with Tom and ask him to talk a little bit about, as I delved into his bio and his work and his past, I realized he has really had a track record of creating nonprofits and then recruiting the most amazing leaders to lead them, and then working himself out of a job. And so I wondered if you could tell us if that was planned, or if that happened for the first time accidentally and you decided it was a good model.
I'm just lazy. I think fortunately I was impacted by a close friend of mine who died several years ago named Bob Buford, and he wrote a book called Halftime. Which is a very powerful book and talks really about the importance of the second half of your life. And now I told Bob before he died I was not in the second half, I was in overtime. But the thesis of the book was that we all more or less transition from what he characterized as success to significance in the second half of our life. And I was very captured by the concept and felt in my own way I'd been an entrepreneur in the law practice and decided that I was really attracted to social entrepreneurship and having a vision and starting an organization. But I learned in the law firm that if you wanted to build something lasting that would survive your own tenure, your own ideas, it was all about hiring great people and getting out of the way. And I felt like I'd achieved that in the law firm, and I felt we could achieve it in the social sector. So that really has been my passion, is how to impact and give back. And I felt the way it would apply to my strengths was to be an entrepreneur.
And Margaret, you were here in Dallas. Well, you're a lifelong Texan. Then you've done many things, and you ended up going to Washington, D.C. We got you back to run the George W. Bush Presidential Center. Then we lost you to the University of North Carolina.
I know, I've had a little bit of a crisis decade, I guess.
No, but I would love
Midlife crisis.
I'd love to hear about your journey that brought you back to Dallas, to Texas and to Dallas.
Well, one thing I learned in North Carolina is that Texans are different from everybody else. Seriously. We're all here to make the pie bigger. I can have some, you can have some. Together we can do great things together. We think big, we aspire to big things, and we get her done. And that's not true all over the country. Mm-hmm. And I love so many things about North Carolina, but I was itching to get back to Texas because of this big think. Mm-hmm. And when my friend Tom Luce, and a longtime friend, we could talk all day about our storied past, but when he called me about this and we started talking about the future of Texas and what I see as people starving for leadership and for talking about the main things, majoring in the majors, as I used to say in my university world, I was thrilled to come and be part of it. Texans always go back to Texas.
They do,
It's
as quick
true.
as they can.
Yeah.
That's great. Okay, well, now let's turn to Texas 2036. And maybe, Tom, you could tell us a little bit of the origin of this idea and what you had as a concept. And then, Margaret, if you could tell us a little bit about why is Texas 2036 needed? What is it that you're going to do that the government isn't doing or can't do or that other nonprofits aren't doing?
I think the vision for Texas 2036 came from my personal experience, which I'm sure everybody in this room has experienced, and that is that we so often advocate and work in what I began to call silos. We go to Austin or go to Washington or go to the church or whatever. We're interested in this issue or that issue or that issue. And, I've been to Austin and Washington to advocate on K through 12 or higher education or an infrastructure project or getting the superconducting super collider. And it finally dawned on me that the biggest issues are really, and Margaret's the one that came up with this, talks about how the hip bone's connected to the thigh bone, connected to the ankle bone. And all these issues, the longer you work on them, you see they're interconnected. Mm-hmm. You can't really fix the K through 12 system unless you're worried about air quality and water quality and health care and mental health, et cetera. And everything is interconnected. And nobody goes to Austin to talk about the long picture and the interconnection. Second of all, in today's political environment, long-term planning is maybe the tweet this afternoon. If you're lucky, it may be the next November. And most of these big issues, it takes a long time to turn the Queen Mary. I learned the hard way. Margaret was by my side in 83, 84. You set out to change the K through 12 system, and you learn it's got 5.4 million students, 450,000 employees. You can't change the system like that overnight. You can't change healthcare overnight. I don't care if you were queen, you couldn't do it. And so it takes time, and it takes a vision, it takes a plan. You can't just throw money at the problem. And that really led to the effort to say, we need a nonpartisan, non-ideological, what are the long-term issues that the state faces? And that really was the creation of Texas 2036. How do we mobilize people across the state to really debate what do we want Texas to be like in the future? That's a bold vision, but I think it's one that was essential to attract people like Margaret, and it's also one that's essential to help us mobilize public support because there's a lot of people, as Margaret would say, care deeply about this state and want to give back. And frankly, the political system is not giving them answers. I don't care which party you're in. Nobody's terribly happy with what they're hearing. Mm-hmm. And so I think it was deeply concerned. I've got 7 grandsons. Pam and I are fortunate. We have 7 grandsons. I was concerned about their future, their children's future. Were they going to have the same opportunities that I had? And I think that's out for debate. And I think that led to the creation of Texas 2036.
Well, and I think the business community, we're high-fiving ourselves all the time about the Texas miracle, ain't we great? And, jobs are growing, there's lots of prosperity for a lot of people, but not for everybody, as we all in this room know. And what we're trying to do is build civic demand for long-term thinking. And folks in the business community have gotten so focused on my enterprise and my community or whatever, that we have failed to kind of build this civic demand around this long-term, holistic, data-based kind of thinking. And I say this with all sincerity when I give remarks that the people, in the gun lobby or the abortion lobby or the transgender bathrooms or whatever their thing is, they went down to Austin, they knocked on the door, and they built civic demand for response around those issues. And we have failed to do that. And so I think part of our remit is to really mobilize people around what we care about together. I told Pam, your wife, by the way, said, I'll come to these presentations so I can kind of figure out what's really going on. Where is Pam? I said, Pam, she said, I need to be able to say it simply. And I said, well, here's what I say when we have to, if we had to put Texas 2036 on a bumper sticker, it would say, we're trying to put sensible people together to think long-term about the most important things. We'll talk about what those are, using tons of data and the facts to inform our work. And nobody else is doing that.
That's right.
Austin doesn't have many facts in front of it at the present time, and the debate is not very data-driven. And the origin of Texas 2036 was I felt like, and I learned this, Margaret and I learned this the hard way in the early 80s.
Quit saying early 80s. People
I'm
are going to
sorry.
think
Well, you were 6. You were 6
People are
when
going
we
to
started
think I'm
working
older
together.
than I am.
But the origin was, and I decided before I launched this, that what I would try to do is develop the most comprehensive database imaginable. Began to accumulate over 350 public data sets, all in one data warehouse, and enable those data sets to talk to each other so that we could project and show the public, okay, if we keep doing what we're doing, yes, we've led the nation in job growth, yes, we've done yes, we've done this, but here's where we'll be in Texas in 2036 if we keep doing what we're doing. Is that what you want your state to be in 2036? Here are the facts. We'll need 8 million more jobs. We'll add 10 million people. We'll be out of water. Your cost of congestion will not be an hour, it'll be an hour and a half, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And I think it was then it became clear that you could build the data to be able to show people this is what the state will look like. Is this what you want your state to be? Then that sets the framework for what we call the case for action, because I think most people, if they look at that data objectively, say, no, that's not what I want Texas to be. Well, okay. Then the next question in people's minds is, can we really do anything about it in today's political system? Well, I feel strongly the answer is yes. I mean, look at the influence 10% has on the left and 10% has on the right. You know, if we mobilize 25% of the Texas public who are creating that civic demand, your voice can be heard. But to do that, you got to bring people together, not split them apart, not create fear, not create division, but how do you bring people together? And I think the way you bring them together is stick to the main things.
Major in the majors. You know, I mean, not to scare anybody. Thank goodness we're in church because we can pray about it. But in addition to the facts that Tom kind of did a glancing blow by, I mean, we're big. We have a lot of assets that the good Lord has blessed us with. Central location, large employable workforce, incredible natural resources that have powered our economy, largely in carbon industries. Lots of young people. We have benefited greatly by in-migration of all kinds, domestic and international, and that engine has powered our state forward. If we had an attitude that we couldn't have any doctors at the medical center in Houston or MD Anderson, only people who were born in the USA, they'd probably have to shut their doors. So we have benefited tremendously from people from all over the world that have come to Texas because of the conditions here, the business-friendly environment and so forth. So we've got a lot of assets, but we have a tough hand to play. We're getting younger, bigger, poorer, older, in this room and me too, and God willing, Tom. You better not leave me holding the bag on this darn 2036 thing. But anyway, the point is we've got, you know, some real opportunities and some real challenges. I think people are surprised when they learn that our native-born kids here, irrespective of their national origin, are woefully underprepared for the jobs of the future. These 8 million jobs that we have to create in the next 16 years if we're going to continue to have these 3.2 levels of unemployment. 28% of our kids coming out of our schools are prepared to be successful in the workforce when more than 3/4 of the job require, excuse me, some education beyond high school. Not necessarily a baccalaureate degree. I want to say that again, decidedly not, but skills in coding and healthcare and cyber and on and on and on, these amazing opportunities. And we need this young, vital, diverse population of ours to be skilled enough to support the social safety net that we're going to have to create for people who are 60 and 70 and 80 plus.
Yeah, let me bring that point home. You know, I hear this argument all the time. Well, gee, you know.
I said that Tom has a conflict of interest on a lot of these issues. But
Yeah, particularly taking care of the older people. But, you know, let's put it in blunt terms. In today's world, and particularly in tomorrow's world, if you just have a high school diploma, you're destined for a minimum wage job. And if 72% of our population of the future is only qualified for a minimum wage job, you cannot pay enough taxes to make up for that difference, period, paragraph. The economy will not work. It's that simple. It won't work. So this is an imperative, and it is already occurring that we're at, in essence, full employment. We have 1.2 million unfilled jobs in this state, and we only have 500,000 unemployed people. And those 500,000 unemployed people don't have the skills to hold the 1.2 million jobs, and we're going to need 8 million new jobs to keep unemployment where it is. Let me put that number in context. That's as many jobs as exist today in North Texas and Houston combined. And migration is slowing down. The rhetoric in this country is such, international migration is slow. Domestic migration is slowing. It's slowing from record highs. But we may have gotten everybody out of California that wants to work. And, you know, so we have some realities to face. And you have to educate the population that is here, because that's the population that is growing, and continue to encourage people to come here from all over the world. We have an interesting map on our website that you can click on any county in the state, and you can see from which country the second largest number of immigrants has come other than Mexico. And when you look at a map of Texas, you will see countries that you never heard of.
yeah.
And
In Cherokee County.
In Cherokee
You know,
County. I mean, you
yeah.
know, and the thought we're going to turn away refugee. Where would this state be without the Vietnamese population that came here after the Vietnam War in the 70s and 80s? Right. I mean, this state has prospered by migration. That is how we have grown, is by domestic and international migration. Period, paragraph. And yet, as Margaret was saying, we have huge advantages. We have a Hispanic population that has been here for generations. That is, it's not like, you know, they're coming from foreign countries. They were born and raised here and have generations here. Our strength should and could be our Hispanic population. But we've got to do a better job of educating our Hispanic population, because it is growing. And as Margaret said, we're getting younger, we're getting older, and we're getting poorer. And our economy won't work if we don't change that.
So one more thing, Diana, before you interrupt with a good question, is that so all of those things are happening while the engine that drives our tax policy and is funding public services, including our schools and universities, is based on a carbon-heavy economy. And the market is demanding that we're going to move to a lower carbon environment. It doesn't matter if we do or don't have climate change, whatever, and so on. I mean, that's, if you talk to people in Houston, they're over that, because they're just, you know, they're capitalists. They're going to wind, solar, oil and gas. You know, they're in the energy industry, however you want to call it. So those things that are providing the public funds for these challenges that we have are also changing. So it is a very thorny public policy problem that we have to untangle together.
Okay, so if you've both been talking about majoring in the majors, these important things. If anyone visits their website, which I'll do my bumper sticker ad for that, it's Texas spelled out 2036.org. You talk about 6 priorities that you've really focused on. They are education and workforce, equal opportunity, government performance, health, infrastructure, and natural resources. Can you tell us a little bit about where you start? I mean, like you said, Tom, we look at these problems and we think, oh gosh, what can we possibly do about it? And where do you start? Or are you doing all 6 at once? Are you prioritizing?
Do you want me to start or do you want to go?
Ladies first.
Well, we have to, obviously, we talked about the interconnectedness of all of these things. So there's a first most important big idea across those 6 things that we have to have front of mind. But as Tom will say, is that, we've got to make incremental progress over time if we're going anywhere. I will tell you that as I've traveled around the state and just today in Lufkin, what we hear are people want their government to work better. Our legislature just passed a $250 billion biennial budget. That's a lot of money by any standard. And we don't have enough money to squander or waste. We have 100 contracts in excess of $100 million each. We just have to run the enterprise really smartly and well. And we don't have the data that we need to do it. It's not interoperable. The foster care people can't talk to the child care people, and they can't talk to the health people, and on and on and on. So we're not as smart as we can and should be about just running the enterprise. So I think government performance is a place that, gosh, I hope people want their government to work well. And that we can find some consensus. The other thing I think will be a major flag, and obviously something Tom and I care a lot about, is this whole education and workforce issue has to be prominent because it's so integrated with the conversation we just had.
Let me mention 2 points on that. We've already had one study commission that basically says out of 254 counties, 200 counties in Texas will have 0 to negative job growth. 0 to negative job growth. That creates huge issues for large swaths of the geography of our state. And we still have 3 million people that live in rural Texas, and that population is becoming older. Jobs are harder to find. Population older, younger, better educated, moved away. Second issue, and obviously we're passionate about education and workforce. On the workforce front, we have to begin to think about how do we reskill and upskill people. Business has reached finally an understanding that between automation, disruption, everything that's occurring, there's going to be an enormous amount of people who are currently employed today that are going to have to be upskilled and can't just be laid off. There's no workforce. So the system doesn't even think about that today. And we've got to tackle that. Healthcare. Let me give you some facts on healthcare. On the state budget, 75% of the state budget, I'm not talking about what the private sector spends, what you spend as a taxpayer, our state budget will be consumed 75% by healthcare by 2036 if current trend lines continue. That's unsustainable. That doesn't leave any money for healthcare. For education, or roads, or water. So we've got to tackle the healthcare system. Basically, right now, we have a health sick system. We reward and pay more to have your leg amputated from diabetes than we do to prevent diabetes. We've got to change the incentive systems. And again, you can't make changes to our healthcare system, which, is a fabulous system and all that, and everybody in this room can get great health care. But we have a system that does not reward prevention, early treatment, diagnosis, doesn't deal with mental health unless you go to the emergency room. And that ends up being costly to society and costly to you as taxpayers. So we've got a lot of big issues to address, but again, you have to build demand to change the way we're doing things. It doesn't solve anything to go down and argue, should we raise healthcare spending 6% or 7%? Maybe we need to do that. But if we just keep doing the same things we're doing, it's not going to change the way Texas will look.
I want to say a few quick words about rural Texas because I've been focused on it just today in Lufkin. But I grew up in Houston, I've lived in Austin and Dallas, big city girl. God bless America. But we have 3 million people in our state that live in rural communities. The entire western part of our state is basically broadband free. And so the opportunities for young people or for people who need telemedicine or online education or this or that are greatly limited, because just like when we didn't have electrification all over the place, they don't have the tools necessary to have business creation or healthcare or all those things. So that may well be an issue that rises to the top, is broadband, those things that will allow those 3 million people, and I looked it up today, more than 18 states. Arkansas has 3 million people. There's more people in Houston than in Arkansas. And so when we think about just the scale of this, that's a lot of folks. And 3 million people driving in the right direction can build a lot of prosperity for themselves and for their fellow citizens if we play the hand right.
Yeah.
And you know, how many times, look at what the private sector is doing today with data. I mean, you know, I've heard, I can't tell you how many commentators say, you know, the energy of the next century is data. And our state government, I served on a state commission about 4 years ago, and I said, how much does the state spend on mental health? Commissioner, I had a personal interest in mental health. The Commissioner of Health and Human Services said, I can't tell you. Chairman of the Senate Appropriations Committee said, well, you will tell us. Well, 2.5 years later, he came back with a spreadsheet prepared by hand that said the state was spending $6.5 billion on mental health, but couldn't tell you in what way or through what system. I mean, we can't keep running the state that way. And to keep the analogy I use with my grandsons, use sports naturally, you know, you can win one national championship. To repeat is tough. To stay on top of the hill and to continue to lead the nation in job growth is going to require some adjustments. And I look back 20, 30 years ago, I think it was something like the top 20 cities 30 years ago, 7 of them were in Michigan. Mm-hmm. Well, look what's happened to Michigan in 30 years. So do we want this to become California, Illinois, or New York, or do we want to stay ahead of the curve? The great news in Texas is I'd rather be facing the problems we're facing than any other place in this country. Mm-hmm. But the issue is, what are we going to do with that opportunity? Are we just going to pat ourselves on the back and say everything's fine and not worry about the next generation? And that's not fair.
So you've talked about the importance of governance and reforming the way government works and the use of data and all these good things. Your website also says that you are unapologetically nonpartisan at Texas 2036. And I would like for you to maybe talk to us about how do you engage in debate with policymakers in this incredibly partisan world? And how do you find lawmakers that will work with you from both sides of the aisle?
Well, we're about to find out. Our board that we've created is 36 members, and it is, if I do say so, pretty impressive. So it's folks like Ron Kirk, who was the former mayor here, who served in the Obama administration, Scott McClellan, who's a Democrat, who is the CEO of HEB, headquartered in Houston. It's Hunter Hunt. It's Cheryl Scully, the former city manager of San Antonio. It's Wallace Jefferson, the former Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, statewide elected African-American Republican. I mean, we're getting the band together. And again, for a couple of reasons. One, I think policymakers, I've worked in government at the state and federal level, and they want someone to come to them with a playbook that says, do this, and we'll support you. Mm-hmm. And I'm going to give them the benefit of the doubt that they're going to listen to a group like this, particularly when we've done our homework, when we have a lot of data, and we will, give them some cover when they make some tough decisions, because that's what it's going to take to keep driving our prosperity.
And that's the reason why it's terribly important that we build public demand. That's why it's terribly important that we have donors from all over the state. We have board representation all over the state. They need to look at who's supporting us and say, oh my God, it's like Butch Cassidy and the Sundance Kids. Who are these guys behind us? You're always following us. Well, that's what we have to create. And again, I think that's possible because so many people are disaffected by the political system. don't feel like it's responding to their needs. They don't vote. This was, I think, I can't remember, I guess it was 4 years ago. 2 of our current statewide elected officials were elected by 3% of the registered eligible voters. 3%. And in a democracy, you get what you deserve. And when 3% of the registered eligible voters elect statewide officials, that's not good. Look at the Dallas Independent School District. You win a seat on the Dallas School Board if you get about 3,000 votes.
Yeah.
And you got $1 billion budget. Now, that eventually catches up with you folks. So how do we create that demand? And that's part of what we have to do, but then you have to show people, this is doable. Here's an incremental plan, but you have to explain to people this is not going to change overnight. Got to hang with us. Got to build a long-term institution. And then we've got to convince people who normally give to both parties. I told a donor the other day, I said, I bet you've never had a candidate come to you, either party, and say they were against education or they were against highways. But in the future, I want you to hand them this plan and say, young woman, I think what you just told me was you were for this plan, and I'm going to hold you accountable against this plan. Did you actually do something about our mobility system or lack thereof?
The other thing, Diane, I would say is, and this is our first product out of the box that we'll unveil around the first quarter of this year, and that is our aspirations, our strategic framework for Texas. So probably about 36 goals. Here's an example. Today, 95% of all Texans have access to clean water. Should we say to each other that our aspiration is that every Texan should have clean water? And that we would agree on that. Republican and Democrat, urban and rural, et cetera. Times 36. How many people in our state ought to have the skills necessary to be an active participant in the workforce? Today, it's 28%. Should it be twice that? We have 3 cities of our major cities, we're living in one, in federal non-attainment, bad air quality. Should we aspire to have no cities in federal non-attainment? I mean, where are we going? Where do we think we should go? And then, and this is going to be the tricky part, how do we start prioritizing that says, well, that water is more important than education, or vice versa?
Do you have any aspirations to make this scalable in some way? I mean, that you would like to create a model that you think you could export to other states?
That's interesting that you asked me that. I got a call, so obviously I went off to, the prodigal daughter has returned. I went off to North Carolina for about 3.5 years and met a lot of people and whatnot. Well, when I left, I told them I was doing this thing, Texas is the greatest place on earth, et cetera. And so I got a call a few months ago and they said, we want you to come back and tell us about Texas 2036 so that we can do something like this in North Carolina. And so I met with this, business group just last week. And, when we think about it, Tom and I, this is like a top secret deal, so don't tell anybody, but we're looking at our competitor states. So there are about 10 states, Texas, California, Illinois, Florida, North Carolina, Tennessee, et cetera, that together we are 55% of the people in the United States of America. Well, if we got those 10 governors, 10 education leaders, 10 university presidents, whatever, together and started to use data together to get in a friendly competition, we could really go places in a manageable kind of way. Yeah. So who cares what's going on in the Senate floor tonight? Whatever, we got to educate people and make sure we have the tools to be ready for 2036 and beyond.
And Texans like to win. I'd like to show them how we compare to North Carolina and Tennessee. Seriously. I mean, look at all the competition on Friday nights. I mean, if you go on our website, you'll see most of our data allows you to compare where Texas is against all 49 states.
Yeah.
Someday I'd like us to be able to, finally say to ourselves, how do we compare to China?
Right.
You know, for God's sakes.
Yeah.
I mean, we are competing in a global competition. And, you know, let's set up some benchmarks. And, you know, I have every confidence that we can meet the competition, but let's show people what the facts are. And, you know, but again, the advantage we have is we could be ahead of the curve. And what you've seen in other states is once you fall behind, it is difficult to
Yeah.
dig out of the hole.
Yeah.
You then start tripling taxes, business runs away, the cycle turns downward, and it just gets tough. I mean, Illinois is about to go bankrupt, and California's bleeding people. And so the issue is, are we going to stay ahead of the curve or fall behind? And that depends, frankly, upon people like this in the audience and what you're willing to put up with. And I think we can create the demand.
I just have to say, just because, I mean, I want to tip my hat to Tom, and maybe this is not very nice to do on an altar, but we're going in the wrong direction on education right now when we used to be head of the class for our population. And we have really, really drifted. Our National Education Report Card that we got this past fall, we had the biggest drops in 8th grade math. This is, you know, STEM economy city, right? And so, you know, it's not an accident. Public policy can be effective and we can go places, but when you take your feet off the gas, foot off the pedal, then you drift and you go backwards. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot of people that we have squandered a lot of talent because we stopped paying attention to early reading, you know, et cetera. So the legislature did pass something this spring, lots of highway and implementation challenge ahead, but we once led and we fell behind.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a very important point. I want to emphasize that, put some specifics on it. From 83 to 2011, because it's important for people to know it's doable. From 83 to 2011, we led the nation in increase in African American and Hispanic education attainment. We were increasing at a high rate. Now, granted, we started at the bottom of the curve, but we went from about 49th to 25th in that time period. We took our foot off the accelerator in 2011. We lowered standards. About 5 or 6 years ago, we became the only place in the universe that lowered math and science requirements. At a time when everybody else was increasing requirements in math and science, we decreased them. We decreased education funding $5 billion. And guess what? It had consequences. And if we don't turn that around, again, if momentum swings against you, but the point is it was doable. Mm-hmm. And it was
in
doable
both directions.
yes. And that reform period lasted through 5 governors of 2 different political parties. Mm-hmm. And then it fell apart. And that's shameful.
So sitting here listening to you, I'm completely sold, but I'm just wondering, I know it's early days, are you experiencing any pushback, or do you anticipate any pushback or criticism for what you're doing?
Here's what and Tom, we're out on the road all the time, but, you know, we hear like, man, that's you know, aren't you biting off more than you can chew? This, you know, why don't we just focus on this, or this? And we've all had these silo approaches. It is a lot. But I do think people are getting that more and more, you know, things are connected to each other, that it's hard to deal with education without poverty and housing and health care and on and on. And yeah, we have to make incremental progress. And then I think just cynicism about, isn't it just hopeless today that anything can be done anywhere with these fools that are, you know, whatever. I mean, that's a quote. I'm not saying it myself.
Margaret's always been a little shy and bashful, as you might have noticed.
But anyway, I mean, so, you know, just the, you know, tapping into that Texas pride that we can lead the nation and we can be leaders and we can do our business. How about you, Tom? What do you hear?
I really do. I think it's very interesting. I've never had anybody say, and Margaret's passed me by now, I'm sure, I made 82 trips on Southwest Airlines within the state last year. Never at any point in time did anybody say to me, this doesn't need to be done or somebody else is doing it. Mm-hmm. The only questions related to, oh my God, this is such a gigantic venture. And I said, well, go big or go home. This is Texas. Yeah. And we have an opportunity. Why wouldn't we want to try to do this? It's important that we do this. And so, but again, because it's Texas, I think we can. Texans have always dreamed big, thought big, taken on big challenges. I'm old enough to remember, when Dallas was 300,000 people, and they used to say Dallas had no reason to exist, and it didn't. And I've tried to explain to my grandchildren, I was there at the ribbon cutting for North Central Expressway, and there when John Stemmons gave away the land for the Stemmons Freeway. And so Texans have always dreamed big, and we made those things happen. And all of a sudden, we just, we all want to go to our respective corners and not do that. Well, that's particularly people in this church have had enormous amounts of opportunity. I've been able to do things I never dreamed of doing. And the question is are we going to apply that to? We're going to be 41 million people by 2036. We're at 28 million people today. What is the opportunity going to be like for the next generations? And do we give a flip? And I'd say the vast preponderance, and again, it doesn't have to be 51%, folks. If we create 25% of Texans to be mobilized behind a real plan, it can make a big difference.
And you don't have to go back to the Stemmons Freeway to talk about people coming together. We have, we're doing a little assessment of our various issues, but we have through ERCOT a fantastic electrical grid that is reliable, that is, world class and leads the nation, and it is set up for success. And that got created in all this, Diana, in the early 2000s, because we just went to work on it.
And right now we lead the nation in creation of wind energy.
Right.
And we have the potential to do that on solar energy, and we got the grid to be able to handle that.
Exactly.
So again, I wouldn't trade places with any other state. But the question is, what are we going to do with that opportunity?
So let me actually take this moment to invite you all from the audience to ask questions. We'd like to have you join the conversation. Allison has a mic. I think there are mics around, so if you would raise your hand. We've got a question right here. We'll get a mic to you. Allison, there's someone.
And while she's doing that, you all take your packages to the St. Michael's Women's Exchange on Wednesday afternoon. Pam is there. And she does a great job of gift wrapping, and it'll only cost you a small fortune. Just bring your MasterCard and she'll get your package wrapped.
And also check out our website, texas2036.org, so you can look at our fabulous data. Yes, sir.
Tom, it's absolutely astounding to me that our state government has no clue on the data of their own agencies that they're performing services for the public for. In a sense, you're doing the job now that the government should have been doing. Are they criminally unserious or blinded about their responsibility to have data on what they do? And how can that occur?
Well, let me try to answer it without being
insulting,
questioning anybody's motives. But I'll give you an example, Jim. We obtained the K through 12 longitudinal student database, so it's down to every student from one agency. Then we acquired it for the same level of detail for the entire community college system, which is a separate agency. Then we acquired it from a separate agency that governs higher education. And then we went to the Workforce Commission, which is a separate agency, and for the first time made those systems talk to each other. So you can go on our website and pull down every school district in the state and see in Tyler, you had 751 high school graduates. They went to the following 27 community colleges. They majored in one of the following 300 majors at that community college. Here's what happened to their earnings. It went up or it went down. And we made those systems talk to each other. So I went and showed it to the governor's people, and they said, my God, how'd you do that? I said, it's your data. You know, it's public data. All of this data is public, but you've got agencies holding on to data. People don't want to show, you know, there's a lot of vested interest, you know, there's a lot of people teaching different majors, different community colleges, higher education system, you know, it's a combination of things. And then we don't invest in IT.
Right.
It's not sexy. Nobody goes to Austin and say, you know, let's invest in computers. I haven't seen many yard signs about let's invest in computers. So, you know, we're way behind. And then I'll tell you the other thing we found is that, and this was a philosophical decision, may have been the right philosophical decision, we can debate that, but government has made an enormous push to outsource more and more governmental functions to private vendors. And the theory was, well, we'll outsource it to the private sector and they'll do a better job and it costs us less money. Well, there's also another motive. Politicians want to show state employment hasn't grown. Well, guess what? We now have, you know, in Medicaid, we have 6 contracts, each of which is worth $1 billion that we've outsourced to a managed care company, and we can't compare their performance to another managed care company's performance because government doesn't have the skill to know how to procure that contract. We're still using procurement rules that were designed to tell you could buy 12 yellow pads in the following lowest cost bid. So you know, it's like the rest of the world has moved in the 21st century and government's, you know, 100 years behind. So, you know, part of it's apathy, part of it's they don't want the facts to be that clear. It's a whole combination of things. And, but, you know, I felt if we started with data and we could put it in people's face, it'd be hard to say, go away, young man. Well, I couldn't say that, but it would be hard to ignore some of these facts if we put it up and made it explainable to people, like being able to say only 28% of the total graduates who finish from our public school system 6 years after high school graduation achieve 14 years of education is not a number you've heard. And that's because people don't want to discuss that fact. Mm-hmm. We'd rather say, well, we've got high school graduation of 99%. Well, yeah, but look at how you count it.
Right.
And look at what you're requiring.
Right.
We'd rather pat ourselves on the back and say everything's great. And guess what? We're going to say we got some red lights, green lights, and yellow lights. You know what? Not everything's perfect in Texas. It's going to come as a shock, but not everything's perfect.
Okay, I saw another hand. Okay.
Well, first of all, thank you all for creating Texas 2036. It means a lot to those of us who are lifelong Texans and believe in the future of the state. Thank you also, Diana, for putting on the panel. But let me ask you about, you didn't speak about water. We all know that water is an issue, a limited resource. You can't make more of it. And I'd love for you to talk about what you guys are thinking about with respect to water, and particularly in light of what your view is with the climate changing in the state. Are we going to be drier or wetter? And what are the consequences for our water planning going forward?
Well, let me give you a couple of facts about, you know, what you call it climate change, extreme weather. Let me give you some facts. We went back and looked at the number of billion-dollar disasters that this state has had historically. and adjusted for cost of living and inflation and all that. We used to have $1 billion disaster every 4 years. We now have one every year. That's because we're big. We have hurricanes, we have floods, we have droughts, we have wildfires. We've got it all. This is Texas.
Tornadoes.
Tornadoes.
Yeah.
Yes. So we have it all. But the point is, we just keep repeating the same mistakes. We don't have a plan to deal with the changes in weather. And we have to deal with it. And again, you have time to deal with it. And water supply is just one of those issues that we're going to have to face. How do you allocate water? How do you conserve water? I can't remember the exact number, but 50+% of our water supply still goes into agricultural supply, often motivated by federal programs that pay you to build crops and then not sell crops. So
Like corn.
like corn. So, you know, you have to look at the whole ball of wax. But let me say one thing about federal policy, and I've had people ask me this about health care. Well, now, wait a minute. You're not going to be able to do anything about health care. Nonsense. We can. Could we change it 100%? No. But we could seek waivers. We could develop our own Texas plan. We could say, we're going to spend our money this way. We're going to spend our money that way. We're going to pay for prevention. We can do a lot of things. And again, just because you cannot achieve perfection doesn't mean if you move the needle 27% or something, you've accomplished a lot. And we just can't throw up our hands. Most state officials are like, oh, we can't do anything as federal government. The federal government wants to say everything's state government. State government wants to say everything's local. Well, that's not the way the world works. We can take the initiative and we can deal with these issues. And we've got to, you know, one of the things out of whack right now is, and Margaret coined this phrase, you know, we're not organized for success. We have so many jurisdictions, so many, you know, cross-sector of governments. We got, you know, 1,200 school districts. We got God knows how many water districts, buds and puds, and, you know, we're not organized for success. And you got to have a statewide approach to this. And then, and again, I think it was the Bush administration in education when George was governor. He talked about the state has a role of saying what students need to learn, and you could have flexibility at the local level on how they could learn that. You need the right balance between local control and state policy, but states got to be setting the standards and setting the guidelines and what our expectations are, and we make a big difference.
Let me just add one quick thing about water, and this is one of the things that we need to look ourselves in the mirror and talk about. It's what I call the Texas way. And there are things that are the Texas way that we're not going to change. We, you know, have incredible land mass. We love to be in our cars. Yeah, Uber's going to fly us out to DFW or whatever. But, you know, part of that is the Texas way. And a major part of the Texas way on water is how much private property we hold. Texas is owned by private landowners, not the federal government, not the state, not whatever. And those water rights are held by those owners. And so we have water, it's often not where we need it, and so, you know, we're gonna, over a period of time, need to condition the ground, maybe not the right metaphor, to think about water in maybe a cap and trade kind of way, or ways that make incentives for people who have water to bring it into our big cities, and to stop growing corn and crops like that our water sucks. And just to reinvent the whole thing. But we have to have a conversation with our fellow Texans about, you know, kind of who's in charge, the state, the local, the landowner, and those are super, super thorny issues, obviously, fighting words. And so if I had to predict where can we find consensus sooner than later, it'll be on government performance and education and workforce and congestion. Water, Tom, that'll be 2035 when we get it. Not really.
But
It's
we're going to
tough.
run out of water, and
Yeah.
water quality is already an issue.
Yeah.
And that's something you can deal with right away is water quality. I can't tell you how many jurisdictions have poor quality water.
Yeah.
And that's inexcusable.
Yeah.
Do we have any more questions? Okay, there's one right here. Raise your hand high so I can see you.
And besides, Dave Bodd's is educating a whole bunch of kids who are going to care about the future. So thank you, Dave.
This is actually more of a comment than a question, and it's about education. You've talked a lot about public education and the downturn in the performance of our students. And I'm a retired teacher educator, and I just want to make the point that having highly qualified, well-prepared teachers is a really important component in public
The most
education.
important,
And I would just guess, educated guess, that it has contributed to the poor performance in math is our critical shortage of math teachers. I mean, teachers who know how to do math is one thing. Teachers who know how to teach math is something else. So I just want to, I guess, we also need to pay teachers a living wage.
Absolutely. But let me say, and this will, I'm sure will be controversial, but we need to differentiate the way we pay teachers. For instance, we may need to pay math teachers more and science teachers more, and that's just a subject you have to deal with because you cannot. And let me say, and then when people say, well, I don't know if you can do that. Let me tell you, when we started working on education in 1983, you paid woodshop teachers more than you paid English teachers because the woodshop teachers had a lobby. And so by state law, we paid woodshop teachers more than English teachers. And so you have to differentiate, and that's the reason why data is important. You have to really analyze what your shortage is. We have a shortage of mental health providers in the state. There's something like 200 out of 254 counties do not have a psychologist or a psychiatrist. Not one. And so you have to set up pipelines, incentive payments. If you stop and think about state policy, there's only so many levers you can pull. You either spend more money or less. You create incentives or disincentives. And in too many instances, we create disincentives to excellence or incentivizing somebody to become a math teacher. And so you have to think about what incentives are, and then you have to think about what barriers are, what rules and regulations can you erase, free people to be more creative. We have to hold education schools accountable. For instance, I worked for a long time on a program called You Teach, that basically the University of Texas created a separate department, not in the School of Education, in the School of Natural Sciences and Math, and enable somebody to graduate in 4 years with the same undergraduate BS that any other student in those colleges would get and go to work for Exxon. But instead, they also graduated with a teaching certificate, and they'd had classroom experience. So they actually learned substance of math. They didn't go to the School of Education and learn education policy. They learned how to teach math. Well, could we pay somebody more that did that as opposed to getting a community college alternative certification? I think we could.
Okay. One more question.
We've got 110 people here or something like this, and you've inspired probably most of us. How do we help you get the message out? How do we mobilize? What do we do to begin the wave that moves forward and sell the Kool-Aid.
And before you answer that, I'd like to let Kathy Gendevine, I think, up here ask a question, and then that'll probably be our last question, our last two questions.
Being from a small town, I always have small towns in my mind, and most of them are dying that I can see. Because like what you said, the best and the brightest leave, and it just, continues in a spiral downward. Is there any benefit to looking at revitalization of our rural areas? Because when you talk about 28 million people up to 40 something, I'm thinking our cities are really going to be stressed. And
Exactly.
I don't know, it's just something that I wonder if anybody's looking at.
Yeah, absolutely. And we think broadband has got to be a major key. The reason that people are leaving smaller communities is because of the stuff that Tom just mentioned. Well, imagine if you had the technological capacity to get a psychiatrist or a psychologist, on the line or whatnot. So I think technology, it can help us with our quality of teaching. It's going to be hard to get a high-quality math teacher in 1,100 different school districts and so on. So how do we give them the tools to have people be successful in rural communities? And frankly, you're right, our cities are stressed as they are. We don't want 3 million more people on the roads, on the tollway.
Let me give you one example. I have seen it work. There's an A&M professor that has developed a chemistry lab you can do on your laptop. You can control a beaker. You can actually break the glass if you bring it down too far. You can conduct the experiments, but you got to have broadband.
Yeah.
Well, there's not a chemistry lab, and I can't tell you. And if there is one in Wink, the students are lined up down the hall and standing idle while one person uses the beaker.
Right.
I mean, for crying out loud. And that's ridiculous. And second of all, we may have to look at how do we make Lubbock grow and Corpus Christi grow and Midland grow so that
Abilene,
people,
yeah.
Abilene, who can move and still be 2 hours from home and help take care of I'm concerned about taking care of old folks. So, how do you enable people to stay in the part of the state they were raised in? That would help congestion in Dallas-Fort Worth. And, you look at the job growth, it's occurring in Dallas-Fort Worth, Austin, San Antonio, and Houston. A little bit, not El Paso, but that's it. And our state won't work if we don't pay attention to that. And so maybe, we need to improve also the quality of community colleges in rural parts of the state so that people can really become educated in jobs that will exist. And that's a huge issue. Still, the biggest job classification in the Bureau of Labor Statistics, believe it or not, is cashiers. Guess what? There's not going to be a lot of cashiers in 2036. They're just not. And so we've got to face some realities or we're going to find ourselves behind the curve.
So here's what you can do to help.
Yeah.
Yes. Good.
Well, first of all, Texas2036.org, get online, surf around, go to your little town, go to the little high school that you graduated from and see how many students are graduating from it, where they're going to school. It is a treasure trove of data and you'll find it fascinating. So anyway, learn more about Texas. Sign up so that we can send you updates and alerts and push out messages and help you stay informed about these things. Then you'll be part of our universe. Obviously, we're a nonprofit organization and we're in church, so this is a place that's used to passing the hat and whatnot.
Where's the collection plate, Chris?
And Tom says he goes around the state with tin cups and knee pads, and so obviously we need to sustain this organization. Our proof points are going to be with the legislature in the 21 session. Yes, we have to build momentum, we have to build a movement, we have to raise our profile, but we have to get some wins in the legislative session with our policymakers where people are going to say, we don't need Texas 2036 and we don't need to think about this. So we got to go big or we will go home.
And where can we access the strategic report and when will that be available?
If you will sign up for Texas2036.org, we will see that you get it when we have our big reveal, as I'm calling it, in that first quarter of this year.
Okay, great. Well, please join me in thanking Margaret and Tom for a wonderful event. Okay. Okay. And we were talking about the beautiful gift wrap that is done
From
at
St.
the
Michael's Women's
Exchange.
Exchange,
That's
one of
right. I'm sorry, I forgot which one.
The one
Yellow?
That one's in your right hand is
It's
for Tom.
Tom, no flower.
No flower.
Margaret.
Okay. Margaret gets a
Thank
flower.
you, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you
you
all.
all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, dear.
Thank you.